Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about punctuation, part 2, signs and symbols that we have not yet looked at, but help us to navigate the English language in written form. And so we're going to look today at 8 symbols or so, 8 or so symbols or punctuation signs that we did not look at last week. And hopefully this will help you. We're also going to offer a short review for those who missed it and look at a few common errors in these from last week. I also want to remind you, if you have any questions, you can press the question button at the bottom of your screen and I will answer your questions at the end of the live. I will upload this onto my Instagram and my YouTube, so you have both options to view it. Now, the definition of a punctuation, I think it's important that we start with that, is the marks, such as a full stop, comma, and brackets, used in writing to separate sentences and their elements and to clarify meaning. That's an official definition. The aim of this live is to show the most common uses of the 8 remaining punctuation signs that we have not yet discussed. I'm not going to discuss every use of the punctuation signs, only what I consider to be the most common uses. And so those 8 are the following: the apostrophe, the hyphen, the dash, these are all in red, parentheses, brackets, quotation marks, braces, and ellipses. So we're going to look at all of these. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask me. I've taken a little bit of guidance from this source here, Literacy Ideas, so thank you very much for that. All right, from last week, we looked at the period, or the full stop in English, in British English, the question mark, the exclamation mark, the comma, the semicolon, and the colon. I want to review just 2 minutes, very briefly, a few important points from last week for those who weren't able to watch it live or on my IGTV. So let's just take a brief review. For periods and semicolons, they serve similar functions between 2 complete sentences. They have a very similar function. You can either put a period or a semicolon. You can see the semicolon at the end of the top there. That's a semicolon. What's the difference? The difference between these two is that the semicolon reveals a closer relationship between the 2 sentences than does the comma, than does the period. The period is a more normal sort of pause. Another review, there are a lot of, I did not exhaust the list of comma uses. There's a lot of uses of the comma. I'll just highlight, I highlighted a few last week. I'll just review in list form. It's not the best way to review, but we don't have a lot of time to review. You use commas with lists between 2 sentences plus the word and or a coordinating conjunction. And then we use commas separating non-defining clauses, long introductory or ending clauses and phrases, and any sort of interjection. And I include however and nonetheless in that very general term. And then finally, we looked at the Oxford comma, which is that comma right before and. It's that last comma, the final comma after water. That's an optional comma that is used, ironically, more in the US than it is in England, even though it's called the Oxford comma. That is an optional comma. Some people use it, others don't. I mention that so that you don't get confused if you see both variants in your reading or in your study. Common mistakes with the comma, very briefly. Commas before relative clauses starting with that. A lot of languages you have a comma before, the equivalent of that, but not in English. I believe that. You don't put a comma before that. It never happens unless the comma is there for a different reason. The second idea with this is that a lot of people feel obligated or comfortable putting a comma after the main verb. And this is also wrong. I'm sorry, a comma after the main verb is another problem with commas, and also a colon after the main verb. So this is a problem in two different ways. A comma or a colon, both are incorrect unless, in the case of the colon, unless it's a complete sentence. So the colors of the rainbow are, and then a colon enlisting, that's incorrect. We need a complete sentence. There are 7 colors in a rainbow, colon, and then list all 7. All right. Finally, the most interesting use of the colon, and it's the one I highlighted last week, is to elaborate more upon a previous sentence. That's the most interesting use. It's not the most common, but it's the most interesting. And I've given an example here from last week. I thought the test was too long. That's a complete sentence. I put a colon. That tells the reader that the next sentence is going to elaborate upon, give more detail about the first sentence. I only finished half of it. So how long was it? I only finished half of it. So the colon, very interesting use of the colon here. And I suggest that you, if you're writing at all, you try to use it. I think you could use it with profit. All right, let's move on to new punctuation signs. And we have the dash and the hyphen. So let's look at both of these now. We'll start with the dash. We'll start with a hyphen. The hyphen joins 2 or more words to form a compound term. Now, you want to pay careful attention because most of you listening commit this mistake. So watch. As a noun, you have check-in at the hotel. Let's go to, I have a check-in, which is used as a noun, or you can use it as a verb. I need to check in. Both are fine. This is at the hotel. You have merry-go-round. It's that little sort of toy for kids, the little equipment for kids in the park where you go around and around. Father-in-law, mother-in-law. The rules are up to date. This is probably more of an adjective. But then we have adjectives before nouns, and this is where it causes confusion. A 7-year-old boy, a 7-month contract, and a long-term relationship. So we use these hyphenated words, compound words, often when it's in the place of the position of an adjective. So let me give you an example here that I think will help a lot of you clear up some confusion. Watch this. The boy is 7 years old. That's a normal standard sentence. Look at the next one. Across from it, you can see where 7-year-old is used as an adjective. Watch this. In the role of an adjective before the noun, the group has one 7-year-old boy in it. So 7 years old, if it's by itself and not before a noun, but if it's preceding the noun it's describing, then you have to hyphenate it and show that it's an adjective. The 7-year-old boy. All right, next we have for a period of 7 days, 10 days. That's 10 days is a noun. Then we have here, or days is the noun. We have here for a 10-day period. So when it converts to an adjective, we drop the S. You notice that? It's not 10 days period, it's 10-day period. It's not 7 years old boy, It's 7-year-old boy. So the adjective, you add hyphens and you drop the S. I hope that's clear. You can ask more questions about that later. So that's the hyphen. Let's now look at the dash. The dash is twice as long as the hyphen. The hyphen is shorter and the dash is going to be longer than the hyphen, and it's used to indicate a strong interruption in the text. I use dashes all the time. I love to use dashes. I probably am guilty of overusing dashes, and I would plead guilty because I like to use them. I ran hard, harder than I've ever run. I've used a dash there, and I add more to the text. The complete sentence is I ran hard, and then I add more information. In one of the articles that I published about the French Revolution, you can see I use the hyphen. So I'll read it. I apologize. It's a bit more complicated language. But look at how I use the hyphen. This article looks at a common societal feature, the inheritance, examining how it became a prized source of income following the French Revolution. All right. So that's the use of the dash. I love using dashes. You only obviously use them in written form and generally formal writing. But if you're in university or high school, or you plan to be a lawyer or do anything serious in business or law, in English or politics or diplomacy, then you should know how to use the dash. Now we're going to look at another set of signs, which is the apostrophe, quotation marks, and ellipsis. So let's take a look at those now. If you have any questions, please write your questions in the question button. Press the question button and I'll be happy to help you and answer those at the end. The apostrophe, I think a lot of you know, it has two main functions. The function number one, it's used in place of a letter or letters. So instead of I am, we have I'm. Instead of you are, we have your. Instead of cannot, we have can't. Instead of will not, we have won't. So that's the first use of the apostrophe. The second main use of the apostrophe is, wait a second. The second main use of the apostrophe is in showing possession. And this is where it can get a little bit complicated for some people. Instead of saying the car of my aunt, or aunt, in America, aunt, in Britain, aunt. I don't speak British English very well, so I say aunt, something in the middle. My aunt's car. We have aunt or aunt, possessive, plus the S. And that shows that it's the car of your aunt. Look at this, my English book. Instead of my, we can say Tom's English book. Their holiday, or the family's holiday, apostrophe S. So the apostrophe is used for possessives and contractions. Very common uses that you need to get your head around. This is a great informal phrase to get your head around. It's a British phrase and Americans don't use this. But to get your head around something means to understand it. To get your head around. All right, you will have to get your head around it because they are popular, both uses. All right, quotation marks. This is also very popular, especially if you're reading. You're going to read this a lot, but hopefully you should know as well how to write it. Now in America, it's quotation marks. In England, you can say inverted commas. So we have the US version, he said. You have two of these. In the UK, one, he said, just one. And they often refer to it as inverted commas. Used for dialogue when you're sort of representing other people or people in general speaking. My sister exclaimed, comma, quotation, quote, let's learn English together, exclamation mark, quote, end quote. We say end quote. So that is a common use that I think most of us are probably familiar with, at least that you've seen it. Excuse me, let me move to the next one here. All right, let's go to the... All right, we have more. Quotation marks are often used to quote a source. So when you start to write in university or anything serious where you have to document your sources, quotes, quotation marks, or inverted commas are very important. So here's how we quote a sentence. According to Michael Swan, the rules given in this book are descriptive. So he's talking about his very famous practical grammar usage book. And then if we want to we can also just quote key words in a passage that someone has used. We just want to highlight a few words. So we have our sentence and we put in a few of their words. Michael Swan adopts a, quote, because it's his word, descriptive rather than prescriptive approach to teaching grammar. And you can find that actually in the introduction to his book, if you're interested. All right. Now, let's move on to the next. We have the ellipses. The ellipses is not common, but I wanted to at least show you what it is. It's 3 dots. And it's used when you're leaving out a word or a phrase or a sentence or something longer in a quote. So you're quoting something and you don't want to quote all of it. So you leave out the unimportant words. In comparing the method of his grammar book to others, Michael Swan writes, the rules given in this book are descriptive, ellipses. Some usage guides give prescriptive rules. End of quote. All right. I hope that is helpful. I hope you're learning something here. You can write me if you need to clarify any of these points. And let's move to the final. We have here brackets, braces, and parentheses. I'll start with parentheses because it's the most common. The other two are not common at all. So we'll talk about them or touch upon them. If you touch upon something, you deal with it very quickly or lightly, but not in detail. So we'll touch upon the other two, but we'll deal more centrally with parentheses because these are these parentheses. I love using parentheses. Parentheses and dashes are 2 of my closest friends when I'm writing. Parentheses are used for qualifying remarks or further information. They are stronger than using parenthetical commas. So instead of commas, parentheses are a bit of a stronger sort of interruption of the sentence. So the life of Napoleon, this could be a title actually, the life of Napoleon, parentheses, then I give the dates. It's a very common use of parentheses is with dates. And then here from one of my, I've just made this sentence up, but it deals with Napoleon. And I want to add information, but I want the reader to know it's not critical to the main sentence. Following his second defeat in 1815, he was exiled to the island of St. Helena. So we have those parentheses to add a little bit of information, but to let the reader know it's not as important as the rest of the information in the sentence. I hope that's clear. If it's not, you can ask a follow-up question. All right, let's move now to the brackets. Brackets are very uncommon. To clarify meaning or to reveal a translated quotation in formal writing, this is not something you're going to have to deal with very much. In one of my articles I wrote, I use a lot of Italian works, so I used the title in Italian, but that I use brackets to tell the reader what it means in English because they might not know the Italian. So I use brackets to explain the original language. And it's used a little bit like that. It's also used a lot in quotations. If you have a quotation and you want to add information to the quotation so that readers understand better the context, you put your ideas within the quote, you put them in brackets, and it lets the reader know this is not the original quote, it's your ideas in or interspersed in the quote. And then finally, the one that I've never used this, I have to be honest, I've never used braces. I've never used braces, maybe in bibliographies once or twice, braces. It's used mainly in computer programming and mathematical equations. You can look those up for the very specific examples if you need to use them, but you can see what braces look like. And finally, I want to just go through very quickly sort of a terminology list here of other signs so that you know the names of them. So we have the number sign, also called the pound sign. And when you're entering a code to get into a building, if they have this sort of press code, oftentimes you have to press pound before you enter. All right, then we have the and or ampersand sign, but we normally refer to it as the and sign. The percentage sign or percent, at or ampersand, but at is much more common, obviously, at google.com or at gmail.com. We don't say ampersand. The asterisk is there. We see it a lot, I think, and oftentimes you have to look at you see the asterisk and you have to look at the bottom of the page and there'll be more information related to that asterisk. Underscore is what you might see, especially when you're looking at emails. Email addresses have lots of underscores. And then finally, in our list of miscellaneous terms, we have the plus sign, the equal sign, the tilde, that's a very uncommon one. It's mainly used in programming. The backslash, the forward slash, and the brackets. Angle brackets, or less than and greater than in mathematics. And that's it. I think we can now turn to questions. If you have any questions, I'll try to provide the answers. I just want to remind